I am a man in my mid-twenties. I paused my university studies to work part-time, living earnestly. I have a family that is irreplaceable to me, more precious than anything in the world, though I live alone now originally. My home was one where 3 generations lived together. My grandparents, my parents, and I lived together in a bustling household. The grandmother I speak of is not actually my father's biological mother. His birth mother passed away before he was even 3 years old. The grandmother I know married my grandfather, who felt guilty for not being able to properly care for his son after his wife's death. Ever since my father was a child, my grandmother has taken care of him as if he were her own, and they share a very close bond. If my grandparents ever had an argument, my father would invariably side with my grandmother. He regards her more highly than his own birth mother. My grandmother, fearing that my father might feel neglected if she had her own children, chose not to have any. Thus, my grandmother has always treated my father as her own son. Even after I was born, she told my mother, "You pursue what you want to do. I'll take care of the child. Don't worry." We weren't in a situation where my mother needed to work. My grandfather had built a considerable fortune from a brick factory, and with my grandmother's support, my father was able to attend a prestigious university and secure a professional job. My mother, who married my father, is also a person with many dreams, especially sharp in business matters. She now runs a factory supplying building materials, a business passed down from my grandfather. My grandfather adored my mother for fulfilling the dream of business expansion that he couldn't achieve through his son. Naturally, our family relationship strengthened. While living together, my grandmother also helped me with my studies and managed my academic portfolio. Like my father, I found that I was more suited for academics than physical labor, and ended up attending the same university as him, following in his footsteps. While not exactly the same profession, I too am studying in a field that could lead to a specialized career. I attribute my admission into such a prestigious university entirely to my grandmother's influence. And even after moving out to live on my own, I frequently visited my family. Then one day, my grandfather was suddenly diagnosed with cancer. He had never been a drinker, yet he was diagnosed with liver cancer, which was a difficult time for our family. My parents were still busy with their lives, and the news that my grandfather didn't have much time left brought a shadow over our family. However, initially given only about 6 months to live, my grandfather fought the disease for nearly 2 years. He bravely underwent treatment, wanting to do whatever he could for his family. Unfortunately, after 2 years of battling the illness, he passed away. I sometimes think he endured all that time, wanting to see his beloved grandchild. My parents even told me, "Grandfather wanted to see you." That's why he was so diligent with his treatment, with a sense of sorrow. After my grandfather's funeral, my grandmother declared her intention to live separately. Despite my parents' strong objections, she insisted, "You all are grown up now, and I want to enjoy some time with my friends. Just check in on me occasionally. It's not like I'm going to die right away." And she moved out spiritedly. It was probably my grandmother's way of considering my parents. She seemed fine, going on cruises and trips to Europe with her friends, always bringing back gifts for us. We thought she was doing well. However, one day, I received a call from my mom saying, "Your grandmother seems to be unwell. Can you go check on her? I'm on a business trip and won't be able to visit until tomorrow." After a long while, I decided it was time to see my grandmother and spend some time with her. So right after my part-time job, I headed to her place. Upon arrival, it seemed like she had come down with a severe flu, as she was bedridden and barely moving. So I made her some warm tea. My grandmother married my grandfather when she was still in college, quite young, and after my grandfather passed away, she seemed to have lost a lot of her vitality, which worried me a lot. To lighten the mood, I pretended to be more cheerful and reminisced about old times with her. My grandmother told me, "You and we don't have the age gap of a grandmother and grandson, maybe more like that of a mother and her youngest son. I've raised you more like my own son than my grandson," patting me softly. Nostalgia hit me, and I ended up falling asleep in her arms. When I woke up, it was nearly midnight, and I thought I should leave before the last train departed. Trying not to wake her, I carefully tried to get out of the bed. That's when my grandmother quietly called my name. She then told me, "Stay here tonight. I've been feeling really lonely and scared lately." Despite her strong opposition to living separately in front of my parents, it seemed she was actually feeling lonely and scared. I lay down again, feeling guilty for not understanding my grandmother's feelings, holding her hand tightly. Suddenly, she turned towards me. Turning my head to look at her, she said, "How did our get to be so handsome? And so tall too?" While patting my back, I tried to pull away, saying it tickled. But where my grandmother's hand landed was truly surprising. Feeling somewhat guilty, I turned over. While she had been playfully teasing me, suddenly she became quiet. Then, at some moment, she took a bold action while holding my hand. I was perplexed, but naturally followed her lead as she guided me. Initially, I wondered, is this okay to do with my grandmother? But once we started, I couldn't stop. She guided me with the same kindness she had shown when teaching me my studies in my childhood. Waking up in the morning, the events of last night felt so peaceful, they might as well have been a dream. As usual, my grandmother woke me up from sleeping in, and we had a late breakfast together. She thanked me for visiting despite my busy schedule, and even gave me some pocket money. I started to apologize. "I'm sorry, but she cut me off, saying, 'Stop there. Your grandmother wanted to relieve you of your stress, thinking it might be hard on our young grandson. It helped me alleviate my loneliness too. Let's not feel sorry for each other, okay?'" Hearing this, my heart felt at ease. Since I didn't have a part-time job that day, I returned directly to my studio apartment. No matter how much I thought about it, whether it was a dream or reality, it had indeed happened. But my grandmother's nonchalant behavior left me confused as well. Then, a good idea struck me. I decided to buy her some natural oils as a gift. My grandmother really loves aromatherapy oils and massages. She always purchases well-known and nicely scented products for her home. I did my research and spent a portion of my paycheck from my part-time job on expensive natural oils. With my grandmother's birthday coming up soon, and the family planning to gather, I thought it would be the perfect time to give her the gift. I didn't contact my grandmother until then because I was a bit confused. After all, she had raised me since I was young, and I thought she might have been equally taken aback. When my grandmother's birthday arrived, our family gathered at a restaurant. After a simple meal and singing the birthday song with a cake, we presented her with birthday gifts. My grandmother was visibly surprised when she unwrapped my gift and saw it was natural oils. The family also asked my grandmother, "Why, don't you like the gift from OO?" Of course. My grandmother hurriedly replied, "No, I was just glad because I used to use this a long time ago. Thank you all for the gifts." I thought my grandmother clearly remembered the events of that day. So, when everyone was about to head home after the meal, I blurted out, "I want to stay at Grandma's house tonight." My parents said, "That's a good that is. Take good care of Grandma." Only my grandmother gave an awkward smile and said, "All right, my strong grandson, let's go to my house," with a meaningful smile. Seeing my grandmother's smile, I smiled brightly back at her and headed to her house with her. My grandmother told me, "I've prepared the guest room for you. You can sleep there." I was very disappointed. Seeing my expression, my grandmother gave me a bright smile and winked. I followed her into the master bedroom. My grandmother seemed a bit surprised when I followed her in, but went into the bathroom to shower without saying anything. I also took a shower in the bathroom in the living room and took the natural oil. I gave her to my grandmother's room. After her shower, my grandmother lay down next to me. When I asked her, "Are you going to sleep?" she just shook her head. Feeling a bit suffocated, I asked her, "When did you start feeling that way?" My grandmother looked flustered and said, "It wasn't that I harbored those feelings that day. It just happened spontaneously. I was wondering what to do, but then my grandmother asked me, 'Did you buy the oil on purpose?' I just nodded, and then my grandmother opened the oil I had placed next to her and handed it to me. She slightly lifted her shirt and lay down on the bed, saying, 'Since you've bought it, let's use it.' I agreed and slowly massaged her using the oil. During this, my grandmother guided me, and we spent a pleasant time together. The next morning, while I was deep in sleep, my parents came to my grandmother's house. My grandmother and I, who were oversleeping, hurriedly got dressed and went out to meet my parents. My parents said, "It seems you both slept well yesterday. Your skin looks very glossy." Then they took out seaweed soup and side dishes they had brought for lunch and celebrated my grandmother's birthday once again. My heart was pounding, wondering if my parents had noticed anything, but it seemed they were completely unaware. After my parents left, my grandmother sighed deeply, and I also felt relieved. Then we had a few more pleasant times under the excuse of oil massages that day. My grandmother shows me a polite attitude. The way she squints her eyes and shows a bright smile when our eyes meet is dazzlingly beautiful. Sometimes I think, what if my grandmother was the one who gave birth to my father? Lately, I feel fortunate that my grandmother and I do not share a single drop of blood.